thank you for joining me. So I recently posted about a ranch horse who had arrived who was very quiet and reasonable and safe in his behaviors, and he has newer to horses owners, and so they're learning. And they wound up finding me because he suddenly quit loading into the horse trailer when they started hauling him by himself. Before that, he had been always hauled with other horses. And so part of what I mentioned to them was usually the suddenly, difference in the behavior really isn't all of a sudden. It's just coming out in a different form, whatever the root cause or issue is. There he is now, hollering in the background. So I wanted to jump on here real quickly because a few people were asking, how is it in my explanation of him that you have a horse who appears very safe or at least reasonable when he is concerned, and yet how is it that I explain him as hyper alert? So this to me is a horse that, if we were only focusing on the feet, which is what most people do initially, they always focus on the horse's feet rather than where his brain is or what his emotional state is. His feet aren't moving when he's concerned. He's actually very still. In fact, he's too still when he is concerned. So he has learned, as opposed to the horse who's flying backwards or running away sideways or bolting forward or bucking or flipping over, he has learned to contain himself and basically quit moving. And I have a feeling this was, I'm going to say, trained into him, meaning every time he was bothered, there was probably a whole lot of pressure applied until he quit moving, and then the pressure was released. So his feet quit moving, but his mind, his mental state, and any concern, any fear, any defensiveness was never actually addressed. So even though his feet aren't moving, his brain is still bouncing all over. And as I always say, we don't want to take the horse out of the horse. We want him to be aware of his surroundings. But there is a difference when a horse sees something happening in his surroundings and he becomes fixated. He becomes giraffe-like in his posture, very tall, very rigid, standing with a brace, even if he's not moving his feet anywhere. If you kind of zoom out and look at his entire body, you'll see that there's a bit of containment and a bit of stress, and you'll see flared nostrils and wide eyes and rigid ears. And it's like each thing that is happening in the world around him is overwhelming him. And he's trying to keep track of things. And so his brain is bouncing all over. So we noticed this, especially when I was working with his owners and trying to stand still. And he was considering everything except where he was actually standing. And yet, to most people looking at him, there was nothing about him that felt scary. It didn't seem like he was going to run over the owner. It didn't seem like he was going to suddenly take off or do anything big and dramatic. And so, unfortunately, when horses behave like this, because people don't feel a sense of fear, they assume that the horse is okay and he's just looking. But there is a difference between the horse looking and reacting to what he's seeing, where he's not even really focusing. He's just kind of like glancing. You'll watch the eyeballs. They kind of bounce in different directions various times. And you'll see that he actually becomes more and more concerned and tighter in his physical state as he's standing still if he is hyper reactive to his surroundings. There is a difference when a horse is curious to his surroundings and he's aware and he can glance and see the deer at the rear end of the property, and kind of usually within a couple seconds they'll, kind of in a slow motion way kind of drag their focus away and look at something else, maybe a car that's passing by, but nothing changes in the horse's breathing, in his posture, in his tension, in how wide his eyes are and how flared the nostrils are, in the rigidity in his whole body and especially the tail when they are curious about their surroundings versus when they are hyper alert to their surroundings. So this is a big one where I have a lot of people that will often come to like clinics or new scenarios with their horse, and they'll tell me like, he's so great in these new scenarios, he never does anything. And sure enough, those horses' feet aren't moving. But if you look at the overall picture, there is nothing soft or relaxed in how the horse is standing. There is nothing soft and relaxed in the horse's eye, or the worry lines, the peak lines above his eye, or the wrinkle lines in his muzzle area, or how rigid his nostrils and even in size as nostrils are. And you'll also notice that if the horse really is not okay and he is hyper alert to his surroundings, it is very hard to redirect his focus. So it is very hard to draw his thought away from whatever has come into his line of vision or his awareness. And he'll have that degree of fixation, which then means you're at the mercy of however the horse chooses to handle something, versus having a horse who is available to hear your input and let go of whatever was distracting in the moment. How does this relate to when we ride? Well, we'd like to think that we're in the driver's seat and that we are being proactive in making decisions and telling our horse what it is that we're going to ask of him. But if our horse is unwilling or unable to hear us on the ground when we're handling him because he's in a hyper alert state, he's not going to listen any better just because we're in the saddle. Just because we suddenly have a bridle on or stronger equipment or so on does not mean that he will mentally become more available. And this is where people will say, well, I can get him to physically move and I can get him to yield and I can get him to comply, but that none of that is actually addressing the root cause, which is his brain is unavailable to address the human because of his insecurity, because of his defensiveness, because of perhaps fear from past scenarios. He has now become hyper alert in order to protect himself for potential future unwanted scenarios. So thank you for joining me. I'd love to hear your thoughts below.